So, I had a few people ask me, what do you think? What do you think about this thing that's going on, right? I mean, everything from, the actual coronavirus itself, the emergency declarations, quarantines, working from home, schools canceled. I mean, the world's ending, right? So, here's a few thoughts, right? First of all, certainly, definitely want to pray for folks, those that are older, susceptible to disease, our leaders, right? Pray for health, pray for wisdom and discernment, right? Of course, now more than ever, right? Especially those making the decisions at all levels. Those leaders, they really need discernment. And even that word is interesting. It seems to me that years ago, a lot of people had discernment. I think maybe it was just more common that people would just have a little patience, think about a problem, and have some discernment about what the right thing to do, right? And look, maybe it's because until we decided to take prayer out of schools and make everybody start thinking that there's this artificial wall that needs to be erected between the concept of God and anything that can collect taxes or issue laws. Yeah, perhaps. But, a lot of different ways our society has really walked away from things that worked well, from the concept of when in a crisis, who do you turn to? Who do you listen to? And have now, for whatever reason, gone to science. That's right, the omniscient, amalgamous nothing of science, right? So that's number one. I want to pray for discernment and wisdom for the folks making the decisions and also remind ourselves, what is it that you need to do, right? How do you need to decide the actions that you should take? Look, we're in a civil society. When a civil society, well, somewhat civil society, under the emergency declarations, we're not really anymore. But let's just say we're in a civil society. And so folks make decisions, right? And so when those leaders say, this is what you should do, yeah, you need to follow it, right? Um, as long as it's moral and not incredibly legal, then those decisions come down and they should be something that should be followed, and we operate that way. But we also want to look at why those decisions are made, what the impact of those decisions are, and then discern what needs to happen as a result. So, okay, let's start with a few things here. Number one, state of Nebraska. They're saying schools will be out for at least 4 to 6 weeks. Health department and folks are saying all sorts of businesses are now no longer able to have more than 10 people. Restaurants and such places cannot allow people to frequent their establishment. They have to take to-go orders or delivery orders. And look, we can get into the reasons why people think that's a good idea. But under the emergency powers that the citizens of Nebraska have granted the governor, who has unilateral ability to enact them, basically, they can make anything they want, the governor and by proxy his appointed individuals, anything illegal and anything legal. It's a gross generalization, simplification of the rules. But, I mean, at this point, they can require any businesses not to operate. They can require people not to be able to be free and move about the block, the city, right? Technically, the governor could cease all sales of alcohol and firearms if he determined that was necessary. Technically, the governor could empower anyone to confiscate any of your property. Tonight, if the governor was so inclined, he could come to your house or could send sheriff officers to your house and deem it necessary for this crisis to confiscate your property. Your recourse would be suing the government. Now, there's a specific provision that impedes the concept of an injunction. So you could not stop the government. You could not require them to back off. It's just when it's all said and done, you might possibly get compensated for your troubles. So pretty extreme scenario, but just to show you how far the emergency declaration powers have gone, that is absolutely within the rights of the governor to do. Again, stopping sales of certain things, prohibiting individuals from moving around. There is a remedy, and that is 2/3 of the state legislature, the unicameral, could come together and override the governor's declaration. That's never going to happen. If you've been paying attention, our unicameral can agree 2/3 on the fact that oxygen is necessary to live. So that's not going to happen. So look, this is not to freak you out, get you scared about what's going on. It's just simply to point out, if you really sit down and read through the emergency powers that the governor, and look, I'm not casting aspersions on Governor Ricketts specifically or individually. It's just recognizing that one person, one individual, as elected as the chief executive of the state, has unilateral authority to completely strip all Nebraskans of basically every right you can think of, right? You can't go to church. You can't go to restaurants. You can't go to the gym. Private businesses, completely unowned by the government, cannot operate if they say you can't. A somewhat arbitrary determination of what businesses are allowed to continue and which ones aren't. And yes, I know businesses are making their own decisions then on who should be working and who shouldn't. I get that. And look, it is very easy to sit on the sidelines and criticize what other people are doing. That's not the point of this conversation. That's not really what I'm trying to get at. It's not to criticize. It's just to point out. When you are responsible for decisions and people, yes, those decisions are very weighty. And again, this is why I'm saying we need discernment, especially for our leaders. We need wisdom. Because when all you're getting is noise about how horrible something is, how it's the end of the world, and that concept of fear, that spirit of fear is just all around you, and all you can think is, what if? What if I don't do this? What are the consequences? I'm not even talking about personal political consequences. I'm not even talking about the folks who are in government just to have power and get rich and feed off that, just drive off that, oh, I have authority, I'm finally worth something. Because I'll tell you, there's a lot of people in government that they couldn't make it in the business world. They couldn't hold a real job. I mean, look at the folks in D.C. that have been there 30, 40 years that never had a real job. I've worked with a lot of people, I tell you, I'm pretty sure a lot of these elected people that all they do is get elected, they couldn't handle a real job. They wouldn't know how to perform properly, how to achieve success, right? All they do is blow V8 and just blather on and on and on. And, fortunately, they have enough levers of power to feed enough dollars to their district and work the political machine to get reelected. I know. I haven't run for anything easy to criticize from here. But it's not about those folks. I'm talking about the well-intentioned individuals and leaders who are not there for life. They're not there to become something as an elected official. They're there to do what the founders thought we should do, which is become successful and then serve your government with what you've learned, right? If you know how to operate a business, if you know how to manage people, if you know how to lead, improve, succeed, that's what the founders thought was the type of person that should then get into government, right? Help the government operate properly. So your fellow citizens, those that either don't have the time or possibly the skills, competency, or inclination to actually serve in the government at that level, those folks can be benefited by the experience you have. And so that's great. So let's give everyone the benefit of the doubt that the leaders making the decisions are doing it for the right reasons, right? And they are in the government and in their positions because they want to help. Fantastic. Now, what have they been hearing for the last how many weeks? This is a pandemic. This is the worst thing that could ever happen. Unprecedented. Never before in the history of mankind has a virus so grasped the populace. Never has there been anything more deadly. Any movies you've ever seen pale in comparison to the chaos and carnage that will be wreaked upon the populace by the Chinese coronavirus. Okay, so that's all you hear. Every news station, everywhere you turn, it's the worst thing in the world. Why is that? Why is every news station covering it that way? Is it because they care? Is it because they really want to help you not get sick? Yes, there are people that care. Yes, they want to help you not get sick. But what does every major media company have in common? They're for-profit companies. They need to make money. So forget this altruistic nonsense that people think that the media is insulated from criticism, that they're somehow just in hard news. This is not the 50s. Let's not be naive about that. Now, this is not some crazy conspiracy about the news and any ethnic angles or anything like that. This is just simply stating news media companies are corporations, major conglomerate corporations, not old school, hard-nosed media. All we want to do is do the news, right? That's just not reality anymore. So in the news media, look, it's always about, hey, it's if it bleeds, it leads, right? It's what's fantastical, what's sensational. So do we not blame them? Okay, let's not blame them. They're just trying to make money, right? So everywhere you hear this. So let's take it back another layer. Why are they saying it? What are they pointing to? What are they saying is the reason for the hysteria? Why is it valid? Why is it necessary? Well, great, there's a virus in China, and it got a bunch of people sick, and then some people died, and it's a problem. And you know what? We closed the borders off. We didn't get an extensive expansion of that virus ourselves. Some other areas did, and now we're starting to see slight upticks in some exposure here. So, all right, we can look at those numbers. Where are we seeing some of the hardest hit areas around the world when it comes to the coronavirus? And should we look to those areas to determine if this is an indication of what is to come for us? How horrible is it, right? And so, two of the top countries are Italy and Iran. Do you know why Italy and Iran are two of the top countries with issues? It's because they have special arrangements with China, and they signed on to China's Belt and Road Initiative, right? The BRI. This is where, as a country, you basically go all in with China and say, we want to partner with you. You help with our infrastructure. You help with our energy. We import your companies and your technology, and by extension, all sorts of individuals come over to work factories and be involved in the government and everything. And it's a partnership, and it's billed as a opportunity for two companies to work together hand in glove. And look, if that's your cup of tea, that's fine. I could go into how it's not really working out well for Italy from an economic standpoint, and how their growth is basically non-existent and they're stagnant and all that. But that's not the point. The point is, there are a couple cities in Italy that over the last 6 or 7 years have been heavily integrated with Chinese companies. And naturally, by extension, an extremely high percentage of individuals in these communities are from certain provinces in China. And there's a lot of back and forth, right? A lot of folks traveling and whatnot. And so very naturally, you're going to have a spread in certain areas of Italy that somewhat mirrors the spreads in China because Italy didn't cut off travel. Italy didn't restrict individuals and they weren't ahead of the curve, right? So it's extremely understandable that Italy has seen a big spike in infections. And then if you look at the average age life expectancy for folks in Italy, and you look at the individuals that are unfortunately impacted fatally by the coronavirus or by the Chinese virus, then you'll see that correlates pretty closely. And look, this is not to make light of anyone who passes away by sickness. Um, but that's just explaining why Italy is seeing a spike. Worldwide, I know this has not played out. It hasn't been an entire season of the Wuhan flu. But if you really start comparing numbers, one of the big mistakes earlier on, and again, if you believe it was intentional to mislead or a mistake because of fear and hysteria, one of the big mistakes has been to compare the projected cases of flu on an annual basis, where they think so many tens of millions of people had the flu, versus the known cases of the Wuhan flu or the COVID-19 Chinese virus, right? If you compare cases of the flu in the United States where folks actually got tested, I think last year it was something like 220,000 confirmed cases. And then how many deaths were associated with the flu? 22,000, something like a 10% fatality rate for the flu, when it's bad enough that people actually go in and get tested. But the media doesn't report that. Media is reporting like a 0.5% fatality rate on the flu because they're using the extrapolated numbers that statisticians and health folks say they think there were 63 million people with the flu last year, right? Whereas so far, with the Chinese virus, the COVID-19 strain, they're saying, oh, it's a 5 times as deadly as the flu. Well, very few people internationally have been tested, confirmed, and then had results fully fleshed out. So, yes, as testing happens in the United States over the coming weeks, then we are going to see numbers change. But if you really look at the numbers overall of people that have been tested, not tested positive, but just tested in other markets, you see a very high percentage, over 90% of folks, are tested and found not to have this specific disease. There's other coronaviruses, there's other flus, there's other things out there, right? And so a vast majority don't have it. And then of those that do have it, the vast majority don't have major symptoms. They don't have complications. So if you really start to look at the numbers, you say for every 100 people out there, right, maybe 3 people get it and 1 person has a complication. I mean, that's crazy extrapolation of the numbers. And, can you compare that to the flu? It's very difficult because they just don't test everyone for the flu. They're going to start testing a heck of a lot more people for this. So time will tell what that says. But if you look at what's happened in China, and the curve is already flattened, right? They had the immediate outbreak. They weren't being honest with folks. Maybe they were. You could put your tinfoil hat on and say, well, wait a minute, they're having all these protests and all this uprising. What can the Chinese Communist government do? They let the flu go a little wild so they can go arrest all the people that were causing trouble, call it the flu. All right, so, there's a tinfoil hat for you. I don't have any knowledge of that. Just an idea, that something that might be the case. So China's gone. They're flattening their curve. It's on the downswing. I think South Korea is similar. Italy is having a big problem, but again, we already discussed some of the reasons why that is. Iran, same thing. Iran joined the BRI, I think, last year in 2019, and they've started this major partnership because their economy has been having a lot of problems. So they have a integrated exposure to China, which is, I'm certain, a contributing factor to the amount of hassles they've had. So, it's really difficult if you're looking at the worldwide cases to try to say apples and apples with the United States, right? It's hard to make a comparison. So then we look again back to the United States. Where are we? What is really going on here in the United States? So, sure, the number of cases are going to start increasing because of the measures that we took as a country, and our leaders made decisions early on to restrict travel and whatnot. So, going up to about 4 weeks ago, all those things were fantastic, really helped mitigate the spread. But then we get to this crazy thing where all of a sudden, here in Nebraska, if we have 2 cases of spread through the community that we can't tie directly back to somebody who physically came from China or somewhere else, it's a lockdown, which is crazy because the numbers just don't bear out. The community spread, all of this. If you really look at the numbers of what's been going on in these other countries, it doesn't show catastrophic pandemic. But again, why are folks reacting like this? It's because of fear, right? If you say you always have to look to science, because again, God, you can't talk about God anymore. God doesn't belong in government, doesn't belong in schools, doesn't belong in the corporate world. Don't even get started on that. You have all the diversity you want as long as God is not involved. There's no such thing as diversity with God. At any rate, so I just touched my nose. I'm pretty sure I broke a law by doing that. I got to get some hand sanitizer. At any rate, so everybody's freaking out because, now you have to look for science. But what's one of the big flaws of science? If you don't have the answer, you don't know. Now, if you've got laboratories and you've got your scientific departments at your schools and you can do your studies and try things out and actually do science, right? Experiment, do one variable, start with a set of factors that are not biased and apply an experiment and not try to bias that to a desired outcome, right? Okay, great, science. But in this case, the strain is, untested. The Chinese government didn't do us any favors. They didn't let the World Health Organization in and CDC and all this, so you couldn't get a jump on it back in December or January. So there's no vaccine. It takes years for a vaccine. Government. What's a good idea? Give it to government. It'll take 20 years. So we don't have a vaccine. So if you're a scientist and you don't have a cure, you have pandemonium. Because all you know then is, I must have a cure. I must have analyzed this and designated that and determined this, and I can inoculate that way. And that's all you have. Because if you can't rely on God, if you don't have faith that your life is not determined by the periodic table and people's ability to leverage some nuggets of wisdom out of how you can combine beakers and test tubes and create magic. I'm sorry, science. Then what do you have? So people are freaking out. They don't have a cure for this, right? There's no way to inoculate the populace. People are going to die everywhere. Well, okay. So everybody freaks out. Cancel everything. Cancel it. We have thousands of people die from the flu every year, and nothing is canceled. I know every now and then, a few years back, we had SARS, and it was an interesting strain, and there were some minor constraints on our social norms. Granted, 1,000 people died first before they did that. So, I don't know why people do what they do, but fear seems to be pretty common denominator going on here. So nobody knows what to do. You have to cause everyone to socially distance. So then, look, there's all sorts of things, medicines and different things going on in the world. So some enterprising folks are like, wait a minute, hold on. There's all sorts of infectious problems out there. We have all sorts of medicines. Any of them work? Any idea? Anything we got now? So you got people out there testing. There's a chloroquine. It's like a 5-cent tablet, right? People take it before they go to Africa so they can avoid certain infectious diseases over there, malaria and other things, I think. And so far, a couple tests happened in the last week or two. They're getting a 100% success rate on curing and avoiding. 5-cent tablet. Wonder if that's going to work. 5 cents times 360. I think what we can do is give $1 million to every person on Earth, and they can just trade it for a tablet. At any rate, so there might be a 5-cent tablet cure, preventative, already existing. That'd be great. Now, all the prudent measures that have been taken so far. Look, I'm not the one sitting in the chair. Now, I had to make a difficult decision last week, along with a number of my colleagues for one of the groups that I'm leading, and we had an event for about 250 folks that was going to honor some very worthy individuals, and it was coming up here in 3 weeks, and we made the difficult decision that we should indefinitely postpone the event because of scheduling and other things that just may not be able to be done at a later date. So we're working through that. But it's, there were some of us that were very concerned because we're not doing this because we're scared that this is a pandemic of catastrophic proportions. It's a matter of if it is something that's a problem, and we are encouraging folks that are susceptible, whether immune compromised or older folks, to get in a environment where they're closely with strangers and individuals that may not be carrying something that may take 2 weeks to discern. Okay, so I get that. So we decided, let's not have the event. Let's not obligate people to either go along or feel like they're not being supportive. Or you don't want to call someone specific out and say, you were scared. So yes, we did cancel that event, and that makes sense. That's a luncheon. It's voluntary. And it's something that can be moved, and it doesn't disrupt the entire world. But then to go in and just say that every business has to completely change their model and disrupt the lives. I mean, how many thousands of people in Nebraska alone are essentially out of work, right? They're not able to make any money. They may not even be laid off. They might just be 0-houred. And that's a horrible thing some corporations are doing. And don't get me started tonight on the evils of amoral corporations and amoral capitalism, right? Not what the founders wanted and not what we need right now. But so companies are going to behave badly. The government's going to bail people out. And we're going to be back in this mess like we were a few years ago. And hey, look, it's an election season. Everybody's got to play to the cameras, right? So what do you do? I mean, what can we do right now, right? We're self-quarantining. We're all grounded. At least we have our phones, computers, puzzles. Read a book. Do a puzzle. But for the love of Pete, stay off the news. I mean, just quit watching the news. It's pretty much, except for the weather, maybe a little weather, just to keep you informed. It's worthless right now. It's horrible. It's all scare, fear. You're all gonna die. It's stupid. And I know some of the news folks. I love some of the news folks. I know they're just trying to do a good job. And again, they're not trying to hype it up. The individuals, the people, the husbands and wives, the mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, the actual people in and of themselves as human beings, as sons and daughters of God, as friends and family. They're not trying to be nefarious. They're not trying to ruin society. They're just trying to do a good job. So I'm not begrudging anyone individually. What I am saying is, I think we've gone crazy as a society. And there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, we just don't have any discernment anymore. Everybody's just so full of fear. They don't know what to do. And if there isn't an answer right now, right now, concrete answer, defining my risk, eliminating my questions, then we don't know what to do. We don't have any faith. And that's probably what's wrong with society most right now. So we're self-quarantined, we're social distancing. When you can, go out and walk the dog. I think as soon as the weather turns up, golf courses should be crazy busy because you can socially distance pretty well out there. But start thinking about ways that we can spend our time more wisely. And then when this is done, we need to start thinking about what we prioritize in our leaders, our elected officials, and what powers we've given them for the future. Because I'm pretty sure when we thought about these emergency powers that can be handed down by one elected individual, that they were thinking about, Red Dawn, like Russia invading, parachuting into our schools. What can you do? Wow, let's state of emergency, or maybe massive floods like we experienced last year, right? Major catastrophic events that are encompassing just tens of thousands of people in ways that you absolutely cannot stop, mitigate, or deal with without taking off the constraints of government. But even that, why does it take a national emergency to get government out of the way of government? And isn't that the other problem going on here? Is that we have to artificially declare states of emergency to simply take the handcuffs off ourselves. Why? Because too many of us have been busy working and raising our families. We've been leaving this government stuff to the people who can't make it in the business world. We've been leaving it to people that are well-intentioned, but they don't know any better because they're surrounded by that echo chamber of this is what you do when you get reelected. Ooh, you do this and you get more money. Oh, you do this and you're important. Ooh, you'll finally be somebody, right? You'll have this title. You'll have this role. You'll have authority over people, whatever the motivating factor is. And the consultants and the marketing companies and the lobbyists, yeah, sure, everybody's in there in the same pool, all helping each other feel good about their really crummy decisions. So, but it behooves us to think about what our responsibility is as citizens. Is it just to go pull a lever, so to speak, for the national elections every few years? No, it really starts locally. Like, get to know your city council person. You're in Nebraska, your unicameral senator, right? Treasurer, the boards of your local utilities and other things. Get to know these folks, right? Like, what do they stand for? Why are they doing it? Who do we know that should run for one of those roles, right? Who's been doing it for a long time and maybe they should find something else to do. And it's only if enough folks start paying attention to that we can then start to influence what decisions are being made. And then in 5, 10, 20 years, when another one of these things comes around, it sounds scary and potentially dangerous, that we don't have to go from 0 to 100 and completely lock down society and remove everybody's liberties and freedoms just in case. Because I'll tell you, the wrong person making those decisions can absolutely take advantage of them and absolutely cause problems. And there is not a single thing you or I could do about it. Now, again, if I'm listening to what I've been saying, we need discernment. We need to trust God. We need to have faith. However, we also need to be responsible. And to me, part of that responsibility in being wise and having faith is using that wisdom not only on the big macro national stage where it's easy to get all riled up about what you do and don't believe and who is and isn't going to carry the water for you, but it starts local, because in order to get to that national stage, most people start locally. So I've said a lot, covered a few bases, but if you can't tell, I'm a little concerned with how quickly we went from nothing to complete lockdown based on what I think is faulty math and a lot of fear, when it's entirely possible that this 5-cent remedy solves the problem, mitigates the infection rates, and in a few weeks, folks are looking back saying, why did we just have a whole bunch of people lose their jobs? Why is everything shut down? Why is my kid not back at school? Yeah, give everybody a week. They'll be rescinding all that stuff and wanting to fire those kids right back to schools. At any rate, so thanks for watching. Be at peace. Have a good night.